Oh, hey there, students. Welcome to today's lesson. Today we're learning about Chapter 5, Lesson 4, and today's lesson gets a little heavy. We have the Second Continental Congress meet, and they get business done. It's rather large business of declaring independence from Britain. Woo! Alright, so it's a pretty big deal. That is really the highlight of our lesson, and I actually found a great video from a miniseries on HBO called John Adams, and it's at the end of the lesson. Be sure to go ahead and watch that. Little picture here of the National Archives. A lot of our very important documents, including the Declaration of Independence, are still there to this day. You can see the original copy. You're not allowed to take pictures, though. That would make it explode. Which is true. It won't explode, but you're not allowed to take pictures of it. Alright, let's talk about the Second Continental Congress. Okay? Got it. The Second Continental Congress met on May 10th, 1775. This was after Lexington and Concord happened, those first battles that shot herds around the world. They had hoped relations would have improved since the last Congress, but in fact, things had gotten worse. The Second Congress included men of legendary repute, such as Benjamin Franklin, Sam and John Adams, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and John Hancock. They had a lot of business to discuss. As I mentioned, the Congress got right down to business. They authorized the printing of money, set up committees, and they even set up post office. Pretty nice. Most importantly, they created a Continental Army, which would be a national army that could conduct warfare at a higher level than that of, say, your local militias. George Washington was unanimously chosen to command this new army. In a final attempt to avoid a full-scale war, the Congress drafted and sent King George III what was called the Olive Branch Petition, asking him to respect the colonists' rights, assuring him that the colonies wanted peace. King George III rejected this petition and instead hired 30,000 Hessian mercenaries. They were pretty top dog mercs in the day, very scary. There they are, in their silly hats. Alright, the war heats up. So Congress had learned that the British were planning on launching an attack on New York from Canada. To thwart their plans, multiple attacks were launched into Canada. Patriots from Fort Ticonderoga captured Montreal, but an attack on Quebec failed. That was led by Benedict Arnold. George Washington, the new commander of the Continental Army, arrived in Boston in July of 1775 and assumed command of the somewhat ragtag militia assembled in a ring around the city. You'll remember the Battle of Bunker Hill. That actually happened on Breed's Hill. That was around Boston. And they had technically lost that Battle of Bunker Hill, but inflicted heavy casualties, and they were still milling about around the city. Washington quickly realized that this force lacked training and discipline, and set about the task of turning these civilians into a professional fighting force. Now, the Redcoats still controlled the city, but not for long. Washington had cannons transported to Boston all the way from Fort Ticonderoga. On a cold night in March 1776, he had his men position his cannons around the city. Basically, in the morning, when the Brits woke up and realized that they were surrounded by artillery, they packed it up onto their boats and fled to Canada. Sweet victory! Washington and his men victoriously marched into Boston on March 17th. They had to drag all those cannons through the wilderness, through snow and stuff. Brutal work. I wouldn't want to do it. Now, a note on common sense. Now, we're not talking about, like, looking both ways before crossing the street, or, washing your hands before eating. Not that type of common sense. Common sense, italicized, was a pamphlet written by a man named Thomas Paine. Paine had migrated to the colonies from England in 1775 and felt strongly about the Patriot cause. In 1776, he published a pamphlet, a famous pamphlet called Common Sense, calling for a complete separation from Britain. It was a very influential piece that brought many colonists to the Patriot cause. You might think of it today as a viral video. It was like a viral pamphlet. Now, on to the business of declaring independence. In June of 1776, Richard Henry Lee of Virginia proposed independence in the Congress. While the delegates debated, it was quite the controversial topic, a committee made up of John Adams, Ben Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, Robert Livingston, and Roger Sherman was tasked with writing a Declaration of Independence. Thomas Jefferson ended up doing most of the legwork because he was like a good writer. He was a pretty good writer. That's like if you ever get assigned to group work and you're like, you know, Nick, you're really good at writing. You should write this out. We'll help you, but you should write it. That's basically what they did to Thomas Jefferson. But he was a good writer. Now, Jefferson pulled ideas from the philosopher John Locke, citing certain unalienable rights like life, liberty, and property. Sounds familiar. It was a spectacular piece of writing, and it was taken before the Congress and approved on July 2nd, 1776. But Mr. Yund, you ask, Beanie Baby, we don't celebrate 4th of July. On the 2nd of July, we celebrate it on the 4th of July. That's why it's called the 4th of July. Great point, Beanie Baby, Ameribear. Basically, they voted that day. All but one colony voted for independence. It was just New York that abstained, which is kind of like saying, we're not going to vote, we pass. It's basically a pass. So 12 of 13 colonies vote for independence on July 2nd. However, they changed the wordage a little bit on this original draft. Changed some of the words, kind of edited it a little bit, and it was this final copy that was approved on the 4th of July, which is why we celebrate the 4th of July. There were celebrations of fireworks, but overall, it was a very solemn event, as the men who signed the document would be surely hung for treason if they were captured. It's almost like you being 14, and then you run away from your house, you declare independence, you run away, and then you get to where you're going, like your best friend's basement, and then you sit down and realize what you've done. You're like, oh my goodness, what have I done? And you'll see that if you watch this happy little video down here, which I strongly advise you to do, because it's a very good video and will very much communicate to you the heaviness of what they did when they decided to declare independence. Yeah, it's right here. Nice, it's good, it's clean. Even though it's HBO, it's a nice clean video, proper for all audiences. It's a little lengthy. Yeah, 7 minutes. That's not too bad. But definitely worth your time, as I mentioned. You'll see when they approve it, they're not like cheering and hopping around and stuff. There's no party. No party. They're kind of like, oh, what did we just do? Which is accurate. Alright, you have a Quizzy Wizzy on the next page. Pretty simple Yun-style quiz. You might have an essay question depending on what section you're in. So it's either worth 10 or 15 points depending on which of my classes you're in. I make one video to save time. However, a lot of you in Section 1 will be having Mr. G making the videos in the next chapter. So they'll be more specific to your class. Regardless, that's for Section 1. So my advanced kids, my 2 kids, you're still with me. You're still stuck with me. Hey, that's it for the day. I hope you enjoyed the lesson. I enjoyed making it. If you have any questions, please let me know. Otherwise, have a wonderful and patriotic day.